Hey guys, these are the notes for the next section of Chapter 12. So your first heading should be Chapter 12, Section 2. Again, these notes are about Congress in action. So what happens in Congress? This is specifically about bills going through Congress. So here's some objectives for the section. Key terms, just important words and their definitions. So this is what your focus question for this section discussed, how committees help Congress do its work or its job. All right, so your first heading for the notes are standing committees. So we're just going to go through the different committees that are in both chambers or both houses of Congress. So standing committees, what happens in the standing committees? So when a bill is introduced in either house, so that means in either chamber of Congress, whether it be the Senate or the House of Representatives. So when a bill is introduced, instead of going straight to the floor of the Senate or the House of Representatives and voting on the bill, it is referred to something called a standing committee. And that certain committee deals with the subject that the bill deals with. So there's certain committees to match different types of bills that can be submitted. So it deals with the subject of the bill, the subject matter of the bill. The fate of most bills is decided in committees. So that means that's why there are lots of bills introduced that never make it to the floor for a main vote for all of the representatives or the senators to vote on. So that means that the fate or what happens to most of these bills is decided in the committees rather. So we're just going to say instead of voting. Pause the notes if you need to catch up. All right, so no new heading. We're still talking about standing committees. Let me scoop that up just a little bit. All right, so standing committees continued. So there are members of each standing committee. And how do they get there? All right, so the members of each standing committee are elected by floor vote. So the members vote each other, the members, into these standing committees. And that happens at the beginning of each term of Congress. So it's not always the same people. Sometimes the same people get voted in multiple times. But at the beginning of each term of Congress, new people take seats or roles in these standing committees. So each House of Representatives committee has 10 to 75 members on each committee because there are so many members of the House of Representatives. So you can see the difference here in the Senate committees. So the difference, we're not writing this down, we're just discussing. So the Senate committees and the House committees, they have lots of members, whereas the Senate standing committees have smaller numbers because there's only 100 senators because there's 2 from each state. But in the House, it's based on population. So there's like 300 and something current members of the House. So that's why they have more. So representatives usually serve on 1 or 2 standing committees. Okay. Senators serve on 3 or 4. So again, we're just discussing the difference here in how big the different, how big the House of Representatives are based on comparing it to the Senate. So in the House of Representatives, they usually serve on 1 or 2 committees, but senators will have to usually serve on 3 or 4 because there's less of them. So there are committee chairmen, who's like the person in charge of the committee, and they're chosen according to the seniority rule. And we're going to write that down just because in section 1 we did talk a lot about the seniority rule and discussed what it was, and it was one of your questions for your question set for chapter 12, section 1. So no new headings still. We're still talking about standing committees. So today the House has 20 standing committees. Remember, this PowerPoint was made in 2014, but that's about the same as now, standing committees. But there are other different committees. So there's different influential committees. So the ones that are the most impactful are just things like the Rules and Ways, the Foreign Affairs, the Armed Services, those kind of things. Those are the most kind of influential ones, the ones that are kind of have the highest standing. The Senate has roughly 16 committees, and those are a list of some of the influential or most influential. They have the most kind of power, those committees in the Senate. So now we do have a new heading. And this heading is subcommittees. So this is, instead of standing committee, there's other. So this is like the second type of committee that we're talking about in these notes. These are called subcommittees. So standing committees are divided into specific subcommittees. And in these subcommittees, they do the work of researching and reviewing the bills that are being given to them for consideration. So again, you can see there are a lot more subcommittees in the House of Representatives than in the Senate, just because of the number of people in each. And so what happens after they do their research, and so after they do their research, the subcommittees, they relay or tell their findings to the main committee, the main standing committee. All right, so next heading is the House Rules Committee. And this is a pretty influential or important committee. So the House Rules Committee, so you can just do a little hyphen like we're writing the definition of it. So the definition is that we'll say it controls which bills make it to the floor of the House. I'm going to add something here, to be voted on. So that's why this committee is so influential or important, is because it's the one that actually controls if the bill gets to be voted on or not. So if a bill gets to actually leave the standing committee, okay, meaning that the committee agrees that it should be voted on. So we're going to kind of write our own thing here. If the committee believes the bill should be voted on, comma, and then we'll say it, and then we're going to pick up here, must be scheduled for floor consideration, which is just voting And the people that will be voting on that will be the members of the Rules Committee. So again, pause if you need to write that. So the power of the Rules Committee is that, so the power lets the Rules Committee speed, delay, or block House action on a measure. So the Rules Committee can then speed up. We're going to add this to our notes. The Rules Committee can speed up voting. I didn't really cross my T there. Speed up voting. It can delay voting. Or it can block voting on bills. So this is kind of cool. It's like a sample bill, and it's an example of what happens to a bill once it's introduced to the House of Representatives. The bill's never introduced to the Senate. It's always introduced into the House of Representatives first, and then if it gets past the House and the House votes, it votes on the Senate to see it. And so then the House will send that bill to the Senate. But we'll learn more about that in section 3 and 4. So here is a sample bill, and we are going to write some of this down. Well, maybe not after I've really thought about it. We'll just discuss it instead, because we're going to do some assignments with kind of what happens to a bill. So no heading for this. So this bill, for example, it's a real bill that happened in 2007, and it was called the Food and Energy Security Act. And it was introduced to the House in 2007. Again, we're not writing this down, just discussing, learning. So what happened to the bill after it was introduced to the House? Well, the Speaker of the House, referred the bill to the committee. So which committee would you refer it to if it were the Food and Energy Security Act? You would obviously refer it to the Agricultural Committee. So then the Agricultural Committee would have sent it to the subcommittee. And the subcommittee did its job. It reviewed and reported about the bill. And it reported to the Committee of Foreign Affairs. And then they discharged it, which meant that they wanted it to be voted on. We're not writing this down, so they decided they wanted it to be voted on. So then it left the committee. So what happened after it left the committee? Well, then after it left the committee, the bill was scheduled for a floor debate. And the House of Representative members could debate the bill. And to try to come to an agreement to get it passed, they may make an amendment, which, remember, that means what? It means changes. It could be one change or multiple changes. So a change or changes. And that happens by the Rules Committee, which was what we just talked about in the last slide. The Rules Committee. And then after that happened, the bill was considered by the full members of the House. So the bill was considered by the whole House of Representatives after it made its way through all the committees. And that last committee was the Rules Committee. So that's how it works to get a bill passed, or to get a bill to the floor just to be voted on for all members of the House. All of that has to happen first. All right, so this is the end of part 1. We'll have a part 2. We only have a few more slides, and this is a little different. It's just some different things. So this is a good place to stop. Please check back for part 2.